Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today I will present about changing perspective and goal of English language and literature teaching and learning. Okay, by joining this class, hope to explain changing perspective and goals of ELT and their implication on ELT methodology. ELT in the word, context and goals. This is The Three Circles of English by Kachru. The first is inner circle, countries where English is the mother tongue. So the goals of English here is English is spoke as the mother tongue. And then the other circle, countries where English current status is the product of a colonial history. English didn't displace indigenous language, but came to be used alongside them, often fulfilling specific functions in various institutional domains. The country here is India, Pakistan, Singapore, Egypt, and Nigeria. And then the expanding circle, the countries where English has been taught as a foreign language or EFL as the effect of globalization. Here, the country is China, Japan, Korea, Russia, and Indonesia. Schneider dynamic model. The foundation see English being brought to a territory where it was not previously spoken as part of the broader process of colonial expansion. Number second, exonormative stabilization. English started to be spoken on a more regular basis in the territory, although it is confined mostly to domains such as education, administration, and the legal system. Third, nativization. At this point in the process, the cultural and the political allegiance of the pre-colonization period are beginning to wane, and the territory is instead developing a new cultural identity which includes a localized variety of English. Fourth, endonormative stabilization. Then sees this local variety become viewed as a legitimate entity in its own right, to the extent that it starts to be promoted as a significant element of the territory's culture. Fifth, differentiation by Schneider. This refers to the process of internal linguistic variation that happen within a territory as different sectors of the community begin to establish their own specific usage pattern. Educational perspective on ELT. Educational perspective on ELT means understanding ELT in light of larger movements within the domain of education that have influenced our field movement, which provide overarching educational aims for any particular perspective on formal instruction. The first, traditional form of education. Second, progressive education with transformative perspective presented as an optimistic and view more visible recently in ELT. Modern times, modern education as essentialist. The essentialist aim of education is to prepare individuals to be good, upstanding individuals who can fit into existing order of society with emphasis on character building, share knowledge of a single culture that manifests in and unifies to the nation state, and education preparing individuals for useful employment. Modern time and the emergence of mass education. The term traditional can be useful when applied to the domain of education. The first, that is traditional in the sense of what educational institution, curricula, and teaching practices were in place before modern times. This will be close to meaning associated with the term indigenous. Second, within modern time, there is a sense of traditional that is close to mainstream, dominant, and long-standing. Progressive education. By the late 19th century in the English-speaking world, this tradition had become associated with the term progressive and began to appear in private and public and mass and elite form of education. Key terms in early progressive education were that it was child or student-centered, activity and experience rather than lecture and drill formed the mainstay of the curriculum. A holistic perspective on individual development was called for. Freedom or student choice rather than constraint and control was important, and education had the purpose of societal improvement to foster democracy and equality. Transformative education. Aim of education is to transform society in a positive way in the direction signaled typically by terms such as social justice. The social goal of this kind of education is to improve society by going beyond merely more and better democracy. A fully radical transformation is called for. Traditional education and reality in the 21st century. Understanding of indigenous as a form of traditional education. While many indigenous cultures and peoples have indeed been exterminated by the modernizing force of the 20th century and continue to be under great pressure in the 21st century, they are themselves not static. They dug and vein and transform themselves, engaging with the modern world, but endeavoring to remain true to their tradition, even while those traditions may change. And the implication of the changing perspective and goals toward teaching methods and methodology, perspective and practices. Method. Hinkle teaching methods are theories translated into classroom application. The purpose of method for second language teaching is to connect the theories of research finding on how second language are learned with how they can be taught. Anthony also presents three hierarchy approach, a set of assumption about the nature of language teaching and learning. Method, the plan how to present language in an orderly way which is based on doesn't contradict the higher order approach. Technique specific classroom activities consist with the method and those with the approach. Richard and Roger also present the and through the Anthony model. The first approach, procedure, approach and technique, and the third, the design. This is involved the objective of the method, how the target language is selected and organized, type of teaching and learning activities, learner and teacher roles, the roles of any instructional material in the method. And bringing the various perspectives together, therefore a method can be characterized by the perspective it adopts on the following key concerns: the nature of language, the nature of second language learning, goals and objectives in teaching, the type of syllabus to use, the role of teacher and learner and the instructional material, the activities, technique, and procedure to use. Okay, for methods, There are two prescribed ways of teaching, and method refers to established method constructed by experts in the field. And for methodology, it's like how of teaching, and also temporary state, general word to describe classroom practices, irrespective of the particular method that a teacher is using, whether associate ways of teaching in general. And methodology is what practicing teacher actually to do in the classroom to achieve their state or unstated teaching objective. And a progressive history of method. There has been a series of language teaching methods over the years, each being succeeded by a better one until we reach the present. The first is language teaching in the late 19th and early 20th century was dominated by grammar translation, which had emerged as a identifiable approach in the late 18th century. And then the early 20th century reform movement advocated a direct method in which speech was primary, with a more prominent role for teaching pronunciation in class. In the 1940s, audiolingualism. In the development of audiolingualism, childless-free application of structuralism to language teaching provide a systematic description of language which has been missing from the direct method. And based around their set reaction against the science of audiolingualism, typical account of humanistic approach grouped together. There are silent way, community language learning, and Suggestopedia, aimed to rehumanize the classroom. And also the total physical response, the slightly later the natural approach. And then CLT, communicative language teaching, in the 1960s and the 1970s century is generally regarded as a clear paradigm break with the past, indeed as a communicative revolution. CLT was portrayed as the dominant methodological paradigm within ELT in the late 20th century. And yet, in the early 21st century, an uneven vision of CLT has given way to an examination of strong and weak CLT, of whether CLT is appropriate for all contexts and culture, and the development or perhaps fragmentation of CLT into release methods such as task-based language teaching and content-oriented approach such as content and language integrating learning. Cyclical account generally suggests that as the goal of language teaching change over time, so do language teaching methods. Different approach to the teaching English didn't occur by change, but it responds to changing geopolitical circumstance and social attitude and value, as well as to shift in fashion in linguistics. From this perspective, therefore, grammar translation was appropriate to the era before mass travel and international communication, when language were learned by relatively few people, often to develop the learner intellectual abilities and enable literature to be read in the original language rather than to facilitate communication. Okay, this is the reference I got from Graham Hall and teaching by principle by Brown and Lee. Okay, this is the end. Thanks for your attention.